So, like usual, I remembered a thing I forgot from my previous video. Um, Trying to think. I just started at the jail. Let's back that up a while. Approximately 6 months after my surgery, I get into, actually, it might have been less than that. Um, I was actually got into another car wreck. Um, this time, somebody hit me from the side again. Um, I was driving my then wife's yellow Mustang. She had a 2001 Mustang, and she was in the passenger seat, and it hit my left side, the driver's side, um, and pushed me into the ditch, and I hit a culvert, and airbags all went off and everything. But immediately, EMS gets called and stuff, and I get out of the vehicle, and my left arm is swollen about that. I mean, it was just swelled up huge right there. And so they immediately put me into a neck brace and on a hard gurney thing because of my surgery. They take me in. They run all the things on my back and neck and everything, and I was fine there. But I had to go see a specialist about my left arm. They run an MRI, and I do not know why, because my arm was swelled up and it was stuck like this at a 45-degree angle. And so they pried it open, and I can't even remember how they got it to stay open, but they had it like that. And I had to remain still for 45 minutes of the MRI and did not. In fact, the lady got mad at me when I was doing the MRI, yelled at me because I kept moving. But it was impossible not. It was swollen. And so the doctor says, well, we'll just do an ultrasound. And I'm thinking, why didn't we do an ultrasound in the first place? Well, being a little older, I'm pretty sure it had something to do with cost, because they made a lot more money off of an MRI than an ultrasound, because an ultrasound is just a quick procedure. Well, on the ultrasound, he saw that my elbow had actually been ripped off of my arm and was no longer attached during the car wreck. And so what they had to do, and I had the surgery in February 14th of 2005. So on Valentine's Day, I ended up having, in fact, it was our first married Valentine's Day, me and my first wife. And I had that surgery. I remember going in there, and they saying that they were going to give me a shot of morphine before I go under. And I'm waiting for it. And he comes back in there, and I said, Doc, I thought you were going to give me some morphine. He said, you've already received it. Apparently it knocked me out. I don't remember anything. But what they did, though, is, if you don't notice, you have two ligaments right there, or tendons. I get them confused. But they took one of them out of this arm, and they reattached my elbow to my arm. And that was already after having that major surgery. So that was fun. Anyway, so I asked the doctor if that caused any permanent damage, the surgery, and he said no, unless you plan on climbing trees, which means that it does cause permanent damage, and I can attest to that because my grip is not nearly as strong as my right hand. Because I climbed cell towers and I couldn't hold it, which, I mean, that, I guess that's for later. Anyway, so fast forward. I tell you, I got into martial arts, started working out. I got in the jail, which I get a lot of experiences working at the jail. a lot of what not to do. Saw my first hand of corruption. It starts in jails. Uh, our uh, our administrator, who had been there for his name was Raymond something, I can't remember. Barnes, Raymond Barnes, and Chris Brown was the assistant administrator. Um, Chris might not have been there yet. Anyway, I started there, and they had a welcoming team for inmates that were hard to handle, or people that had been arrested and are fighting. And I was not allowed to be on the team because they didn't trust me because I was too on the level. I guess that's the best way to say it. I'd already been talking about Constitution and you know my desire to be a police officer, and how people's rights are important to me, and they weren't really a big fan of that. Um, but I it was funny when I started in the jail. I mean, I was small. I was skinny. I just got out of having this surgery, so I don't do like a lot of guys do. I lose weight when I'm not able to be physical. Um, and so I was pretty skinny, not intimidating at all. So I had to learn verbal judo. I also had to learn to pay attention to people, because in the jail, you have people in there that spend their whole time trying to figure out how to con you. And and that's just the people you work with. Uh, I also learned that not everybody in jail are bad people. In fact, a good percentage of people that are in jail are not bad people. They just made stupid decisions, or they got the wrong end of a deal. You know, but I learned a lot about verbal judo. I learned about how to talk to people, and that I'm showing somebody respect. Even people over there, I mean, not losing my temper. It got me far. I remember there was a riot that broke out in one of the pods. And the way it was is that Muskogee County Jail is pretty decent size. And it's pretty rough because Muskogee is a pretty rough town anyway. And in fact, Tulsa would send a lot of their Muskogee guys. And Muskogee was rated that we could house federal inmates. Um, we've got some of some pretty bad people in there. And jails are not like prisons in the fact that it's actually stricter. So they have less privileges than they would if they were in prison. So a lot of these guys that are going to prison, they're wanting to get to prison. Um, or they're guys that have been in prison a lot are used to prison, and they're not handling this really well. You get a lot of repeat offenders, but I was so naive. I remember um, seeing this one cat. He was in there for murder. He actually got arrested when he was 15 or 16 years old. He took his cousin and drove him out into the dirt road in the middle of nowhere, made him get down on his knees and killed him, shot him in the back of the head, execution style. That's point blank. Over $20 because he owed him $20 and hadn't been paying. Anyway, so he's in the jail, and I saw him just kind of shadow boxing, and I didn't understand what he was doing. I was like, "You're not going to hurt anybody." I was like, "That's not the way you fight." And we're having this conversation again. I was very naive. I really was for his way I grew up. I was pretty naive about a lot of things. I was too busy, I guess, with my life. And later on, we'll get to why I found out that a lot of things that I should have learned didn't click in my head like other people. Um, But I remember later on, when I became a cop, looking back at this moment and me teaching him how to punch properly. What he was actually doing was practicing fighting with handcuffs on. He was practicing how to fight the police, and he ended up trying to fight me once. But I'm going to go back because I just remembered I was telling you about when there was a riot. So there's a riot, and me and another guy who ends up being another officer later on. It's funny, we actually uh, followed each other for a while in law enforcement unintentionally. But he, we go in there and another guy takes off running. I mean, another detention officer takes off running and gets out before, and closes the door on us. So it's just me and this other guy and like 15 other inmates. And they're turning towards us. But then a few of the guys, the older guys and stuff, told them to not touch me. And it wasn't because I was corrupt. I wasn't. They knew that if you did something wrong, I'm going to get you for it. But I'm not out to try to find out how I can make your life horrible or anything. And I'm always honest. And I treated everybody with respect. I didn't care what you did. To a detriment to my inner feelings. I had issues sometimes because we had a pedophile tank, and I treated them just as fair as I treated anybody else. And it's just amazing the mentality. The pedophile tank was they were like children. I mean, they were really like young teenage boys. Um, because you didn't really see girls, honestly, sex offender women. There are some, but you don't really see them a whole lot. They don't get caught usually. Well, back then it was less heard of. I've heard of it more now from like teachers and stuff. Um, but anyway, back to my guy that was the murderer. He is now like 19 years old. He's been in for a while, and he still hasn't got sent off because the case is still it's that long. And he ends up getting mouthy with me when I was trying to take him from one place to the next, and he decided to fight me. And we didn't have to cuff everybody when we walked them. And he decided to fight. He had nothing to lose. I mean, he's in there he knows he's spending the rest of his life in prison. He's just wanting to get to the prison. And a lot of times, if you end up being a problem, the jail's going to try to get rid of you. They don't want you around. But I ended up taking him to the ground, and it was right in front of everybody because there's windows everywhere. Everybody can see you. So I was in the pod with the big timers, the ones that are looking at some long time prison sentences, the felons. And it actually helped gain some respect because he was a lot bigger than me. And I took him down pretty quickly. I mean, he quit mouthing me after that. And I learned that, you show people respect, and not always because they deserve it. Not everybody deserves respect that you give them, but you're not showing respect necessarily because of them. You're showing respect because it's who you are. You can be respectful to unrespectful people or disrespectful people, whether they deserve it or not. It's like being kind to people even though they don't deserve it. I have a shirt that says "Don't be a dick," the Bible. It's for a reason. It's because sometimes showing love is simply just not being a dick. We need to love everybody, including our neighbors, including our enemies. But he learned quick. He actually ended up respecting me. He didn't give me any problems after that. And most people just got where they just didn't give me problems. A lot of the older school guys, they knew if they said, "Hey, Hayes, would you mind going and telling them that I need to talk to my attorney or go do this, go research?" It was, as long as it was legal, I didn't have a problem. But the problem is a lot of people, a lot of, especially detention officers, they get in there and not all of them have a desire to be police officers. A lot of them are just happy being there. I knew one guy, he got a job there 6 months after he got out of jail. I mean, he was a trustee there, which is a stupid, but that's the mentality in a jail. Is they just want warm bodies most of the time. That's why you get a lot of problems. But a lot of them have this big. It's worse than on the street. Police officers, they get this badge heaviness. They just want to push people around, show that they're not, small. They're not weak. And I learned in life. I mean, it's not really showing that you're not small. You just need to show that you won't be pushed around. And a lot of times that just takes being nice until somebody pushes you around. But I learned in martial arts, though, people quit wanting to fight me after I started doing martial arts. People wanted to fight me all the time before that. I thought it was because of them, but it was me. I mean, like I said before, I was angry. I was pissed off. And I was still pissed off after I started training. But I didn't walk around looking for a fight anymore. I was mad. I was angry. It was internalized, you know. But my desire to be a police officer, though, was still pretty strong. Um, and 3 months in, I get there's a position at Muskogee PD. So I apply. I take the written course, and of course, I've passed that. Then I take the physical, and I failed the run. I could not run. You know, I actually popped a couple of pain pills before I did it because I thought I was going to be hurting. And at that time, my doctor actually told me that one, I'm going to be on pain pills for the rest of my life, and two, to take it before I started hurting because it won't help 100% unless I take it before I start hurting, which is all true. It's just really bad practice because that's how you get addicted. And I did. I just didn't realize I did. Um, Not that bad at the beginning though. I was, you know, it wasn't that bad. But I did fail. I didn't make Muskogee PD. I was pretty bummed by that, but I swore I was going to keep trying. And so I tried at the sheriff's department, but they called me Officer Buddha because, or Little Buddha, sorry, Little Buddha, because I studied Buddhism a lot back then. And I think that's really what told them that they did not want me to be a part of that entrance team, was because they knew that. And you can't be that type of person, I guess, and do the job right. That's what they believed. So but I kept working, and I did my job great, and I kept getting turned down, passed over for promotions there. I didn't know why, because everybody could depend on me. I never called in. I always did my job. Nobody ever had to get onto me for anything, which is a very rare at a jail. And I could handle my stuff, and I didn't get people in danger. I always maintained the one door policy. You would think that would be easy. You think just doing my job was just doing my job, but most people couldn't handle that. They would have two doors open at the same time, which is an escape risk. It was just, I was really good with knowing what the rules were. Now, I've always said I rebelliously follow the rules. If the rules don't make sense, I'm not inclined to always follow them. But if they make sense, then why break them? If they're there for a reason and the reason makes sense. But I eventually, a few months later, um, I apply for Coweta Police Department. And I go, and this time, instead of the run being on a track, which Muskogee was, it was actually through town, which was a lot easier because you can get your mind somewhere else, and a lot of reasons. I mean, most physical activity is mental anyway. Um, and I prepared more for it. Uh, but I ended up getting offered a position. Um, and so I get offered this position. And it's in Coweta, which is, I mean, I was driving from Tenkiller to Muskogee every day, which was about 15 minutes, 20-minute drive, something like that, 30-minute drive. So we were going to have to move to either Coweta or somewhere close to Coweta. But I remember I signed up before I got offered got offered the position. I signed up for a pepper spray class to get certified in pepper spray because you have to be certified in that. Um, and then I got accepted the position. Well, as a police officer, you don't have to be certified. Well, they change year by year, but at this time, you didn't have to be certified in pepper spray. So to carry. But I thought, I even said this. I was like, hey, I'm a man. If I signed up for it, I'm going to do it. And that meant you had to get certified. You had to take had to take a written course, but you also had to get sprayed because you had to know what it's like. Because one, when you spray it, it's going to come back on you and you got to know how to handle it. Um, so we get there that morning. It was right before my shift and they were 12-hour shifts. And we had to, uh, when we got there would be a deputy out there and he would spray you like right above your eyes, and then you were to try to open your eye and pretend like you have a gun and follow them. I mean, everybody does it differently. This has just happened the way they did because they didn't have area for an obstacle course or anything like that. Well, regular spray is just a liquid that sprays on you. You don't want to wipe it off because it'll smear on your face. You just leave it alone and you go like that, and it doesn't really drip or anything unless somebody constantly stays on you and sprays. um, this particular deputy wanted to be a dick and he used gel. The thing about gel is if you try to rub it, it gets slick and it gets in your eyes, and you can't grab your eye, open your eye. Like when they tell you open your eye, with your hand and do it, I couldn't do it. So I had to get my shirt and do that. And they all thought I was trying to wipe it off. But I also found out that day that I am allergic to OC spray. I swelled up and it just did not go away. It's supposed to go away within like 30 minutes. And it didn't. And I worked a whole 12-hour shift with inmates with pepper spray on me because they didn't let me skip work. You know, I still had to go to work among these criminals because they didn't care. Um, so I don't know if it was really a smart thing to stay, but at least I knew what it felt like to get pepper sprayed. So um, I did carry it for a little bit. I ended up, we did end up. I left a couple of weeks later, started in Coweta, and for the first few weeks, I'm actually working as a police officer. I've got my badge, my gun, everything. I'm not trained, but I'm riding with somebody. Uh, Coweta was a interesting. Um, I'd found out um, uh, a few weeks, well, a couple of weeks after accepting the position, I moved. We get a place in Wagner. We get a house up there, and and I drove. It's a 20-mile drive, and I was allowed to drive 20 miles uh, in a patrol car. So I didn't have to work in my own hometown, which I didn't want to work in the town that I lived in. But I I was very green. Um, Thinking back now is scary. Some of my thought processes about the way things went. But instantly, one of the sergeants absolutely hated me. His name was Sergeant Black, Doug Black. I mean, this guy was a douche. He had Napoleon complex. He was really short. Um, he wore a Rolex watch that he bragged about. It was like a $2,500, $3,000 watch. He said he only wore expensive socks and underwear. And he had a tattoo on his belly that said thug. Um, Real upstanding character. And he was always cheating on his wife. But but I still try to, I learned a lot from that department. It was my first department. But what was a blessing is that they had their flaws, but they tried to be very professional about everything. At least that's what my viewpoint was. And they tried to teach professionally because there's police departments out there that they don't really have a real strict training regimen. They expect the academy to train you on everything. And most people think that's the way it is. And it's not. The academy just teaches certain uh, legal practices and tactics and, shooting and driving and stuff. But you learn the rules, procedures, how to talk to people, all that stuff, basic stuff from your department and how to present yourself. Well, we had to um, have our uniforms fitted. A lot of departments, they don't do that. I see it more now than the others, but a lot of small departments definitely don't do it. But we always had to polish our brass. We had campaign hats. Look like you'll see troopers or Mounties wear. And we had it. In fact, people would joke and call it the Coweta Highway Patrol. Um, but the first call I can remember going on was actually a 2-year-old drowning victim. Um, we get to it, and I, of course, being new, I stayed on the outside and watched the perimeter, and they all go in, and this little child was being watched by their 14-year-old daughter, who was in the room on the computer watching porn, and the parents were asleep in their room, and gets out and goes out to the backyard, climbs in the pool, or falls in the pool and drowns. Um, but yeah, so it's a little different when that your very first call that you can remember is drowning. Um, but it was funny because, well, not funny. I mean, funny isn't strange and kind of humorous the way this happened. Not that it sounds really bad saying funny, but you become a cop and you tend to overlook some of the things like that, as in you have kind of a darker sense of humor. You're able to be crack jokes when it's inappropriate, but it makes it easier to deal with stuff like that. And I didn't have kids at the time, uh, but my lieutenant and I'll have a post briefing or a debriefing meeting, and he said that it should have been handled as a crime scene instead of an accident scene because it could have been easily a murder and might have been. And they try to get their evidence as if it was a murder, and they did investigate, but if we would have started that way, it would have been different. But I remember him asking, because as a crime scene, we're sitting there taking notes, writing all the scene, we tape it off, all this stuff properly. And so he turns to me thinking that, me being the rookie, I was supposed to be a lesson. And so he said, what color was the house? I said it was red brick. He said, okay. What was in the front yard? Well, there was this tree that was surrounded by these bricks. was like, okay. Well, he kept on going and going and going. I kept describing everything. He's like, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of what I was trying to say. He's like, if you don't start and everything, it's hard to remember everything. But that's just, I remember things like that. I remember what I feel is important to me. Um, and I don't even mean to. It's not like I'm trying to memorize it. I just look in my head and I see it or I hear it. Honestly, it's more of a feeling. I feel it. Um, it's just an instant knowing. I can't explain it. My brain is because I'd always thought I thought in pictures until I actually thought about it. And it's like, I don't actually think in pictures because the thought comes, it's just like an instant knowing, and then I'll have kind of a vapor of a picture pop up for a split second that will represent my thought. It's not my thought being represented by the picture. Anyway, I'm rambling, but it's uh, it was rough, but um, I learned a lot about warrants and stuff like that. I and eventually got done with FTO, and in the middle of that, uh, my wife tells me that she's pregnant. Um, and so I'm like, well, I was excited because I'd always wanted to be a father. I was young. I was 26 years old, I believe. Um, and, which was great because in my family, everybody had kids way younger than that. I mean, so, um, heck, all my siblings had kids. Um, and again, I was the second oldest out of seven, eight, something like that. But so I continued to work. I ended up getting put on a different shift because another sergeant recognized that I was being bullied by my sergeant at night shift. So he put me on day shift, and I worked with him. And while I was working with him, we had this call, and I'm going. It's this older gentleman, about 55 years old. He's going to businesses and handing clay discs, which we call uh, I forgot now. It's for skeet shooting. I mean, for when you're practicing, clay. We call them clay doves. But that's it's a terrorist threat, is what we were taking it as. And so I was writing a report on it, and then I get this other call that he was in Walmart and he ended up hitting a cashier with a camera. So I was like, well, that's assault. So, and we had it on video. So I had PC to arrest him. So I'm driving, and I'd been looking for him for a while, a couple of days, and he I see him at the gas station filling up with fuel. And I call my sergeant, and we meet up, and he says, "Well, he's in the middle of filling up because my sergeant was very far away." He said he's filling up right now. He said, "Let's go ahead and go inside because he's got to pay for the fuel." This was back before it was real common for people to pay at the pump. Um, so we go inside, and we're on camera, and this guy walks in, and he instantly, you see him on camera, he puts his fist up. He said, "Let's dance." And so you see me run around him so we can get both sides. And the fight was on. My sergeant actually, my sergeant was about 6'4", 6'5", something like that. I don't know. He's tall. Me, 5'9", 145, 150 pounds at this time. He closes his asp, his baton, what people think it is, but the asp, it's collapsible. Closes it in on him. To describe how hard that is, for us to close that, we have to beat it into concrete to get it to close. And he closed it right on his manhood, and the guy didn't even flinch. Um, I ended up emptying my pepper spray can on him, which is a lot, and it wasn't affecting him. It's affecting me though, and my sergeant. He picks my sergeant up and slams my sergeant on the hood of his own car, which ended up breaking parts of his back and putting a hole in his car from his 1911. And so I go back and I end up trying to put his hands on behind him, and it didn't affect him at all. I broke both wrists. Later, I find out. And then so I put him in a neck restraint, and he goes to sleep within seconds. Because if you do a true neck restraint, it's not a chokehold. I'm not cutting off his breath. I'm cutting off the blood supply to his head, which only takes a few seconds. And so he goes to sleep. I put him in cuffs. He wakes up. He looks at me. He says, "I'm sorry." And this was the nicest gentleman I'd ever talked to. I mean, he was real compliant from that point on. It was just like, no big deal. I ended up taking him to the ER to get him all checked out. I mean, he had wrists that were just, I mean, he was a rancher. He'd been a rancher his whole life. He was the same size as me, and he was 55 years old. And he whooped a 26 and a 32-year-old's ass. But that was one of the excitement things. You come find out a few years later, he chased an officer around the officer's car in Wagner with a knife, and another officer pulls up, ends up shooting him and kills him. He was schizophrenic, and he had a lot of other mental issues. So one minute he's nice, the next minute he's trying to kill you. But I seen some. It's weird growing up around domestic violence, but to see it. I mean, I guess it because it'd been so long. My sense of logic was different, but I remember this one call, this domestic violence. I had to go to the hospital. This woman got beat with a telephone. This was back in the, landlines. She was trying to call 911, and he grabs the phone and beats her with the phone. And she's her skull got cracked open and everything. And it's a felony domestic because the assault was so bad, and it was second assault anyways, which automatically made it a felony. But then it was felony for preventing her from calling 911. But we're looking for the guy. He's not home or anything. Well, the next day we decided to stop by her house again to see if she had seen him. And she said, "No, he's not here. I haven't seen him at all." He was in the house with her. She already had forgiven him. And I saw that on so many occasions. I had this one. In fact, the only time I ever stood in court was um, uh, I went to this domestic. This guy elbowed his pregnant girlfriend. She was younger, but of age. And I arrested him. She writes out a statement against him, then recants it later in court. But because the judge took my word for it, back then they actually took our words for stuff, and I had a written statement, he got sentenced anyway. But I just didn't understand. You know, when it's out of fear, and people think that every time it's out of fear, but it's not. And I said this when I ended up in the academy. A few months later, we took a class on domestic, and it's amazing. People that didn't grow up around domestics think they know about domestics and stuff. And my instructor was actually asking, why do women keep going back? And people said fear or something like that, or they have nowhere there to go. And I said, because they're comfortable. And he said, no, that's stupid. Why would anybody ever be comfortable? It's the caged dog effect. It's that it becomes their home. It's their norm. They know what to expect. And they think they love the person and the person loves them. And that's just part of the deal. And it's sad. But that was one of my last calls. I mean, my last death there was a 17-year-old kid had was living with his grandparents, and he locked his door, climbed out of his bedroom window. He was on the first floor, and he hung himself out of the tree right there. And we get there, and he's hanging from the tree, and his grandpa's crying, trying to get him out of the tree. And so we had to go up there and get him out of the tree and everything. But and he wrote a letter, and his mother. I mean, it reminded me a lot about me. I mean, his mother was she was into drugs and stuff, and lost custody of him and everything, and he just didn't want to live anymore. Um. Anyway, so I ended up going to the academy. It was, I want to say, the very first or second. We were either the first or second academy to be at the new central location, because before that, all the academies were split up all over Oklahoma. So it's one central location. I get there and I still have the same problem I've always had, and that's being friends with people. I just didn't fit in. But my roommate was a tribal officer, and me and him seemed to get along really well. He was into martial arts, which was funny. He was into Jeet Kune Do, which is a small man's martial arts, fast, everything. And this guy was big, not fat big. He was muscular. Everybody called him the Hulk, um, but he was super friendly. Everybody's best friend. And I was the opposite. I got picked on a lot. Uh, in fact, there's one guy that was in the county that I lived in and worked in, and he was there, and he started shit talking me in the middle of class because they wanted to hear a story, because everybody there had worked. They didn't just get sent to the academy before they got to the streets. We all, at that time, especially, we all had street time before we went to the academy. And he starts making fun of me in front of everybody. And we had group leaders that were in the same class as us. They weren't teachers or anything, or sorry, instructors. And the instructor was wanting us to both apologize. And I said, why would I apologize to him if I'm not sorry for anything? If he's the one who is trash talking my call, saying that we got our asses whooped by a 55-year-old, he obviously had never been a police officer, because and been in that situation. 55 is not that old. Um, I know some 55-year-olds that can whoop just about anybody. And but he ended up being a corrupt little piece of shit. Um, and there unfortunately there is a lot of corruption in law enforcement. Not as much as some people think, but a lot more than other people think. And it's not always the corruption you think it is. Sometimes the corruption isn't them taking money or anything like that, or throwing drugs on people. It's just their badges are huge, and they're lazy. Lazy is one of the biggest corruptions I dealt with in law enforcement. But I was feeling, I mean, even though it was bad there, was I was actually feeling like I was doing something in the world. Um, I mean, I was doing something they said that was impossible. I'm a police officer. I'm at the academy. I've got a wife with a child. We're not doing drugs or anything. Um, I say that my wife brings home a friend of ours was well, one of my friends was needing a place to stay, and we already had a female friend of hers uh, that was living there temporarily. And my friend came up to me and said, she's like, I don't mean to be that person. She said, but she's got, she's bringing pot into your house. And here I am, a police officer. And I tell my wife at the time, and, we were young. She was even younger than me. So, I mean, she was, I think, 20, 21 at the time. Um, and, um, and I told her, I was like, you getting mad about it? She's like, it's just pot. I was like, yeah, I arrest people from pot. I'd arrest you if I caught you with pot. I would. I still wouldn't. It was a shitty thing to say. But that was the type of cop I was. I was very by the book. I was so scared I was going to get fired all the time. Um, I was always trying to do everything right. But when I went to the academy, I was so successful at everything. Everything I did well. It was like I was made for law enforcement, even though I started so green. But as green as I was, when I learned something, I learned it and I was good at it. And you couldn't trick me. I knew I knew the answers. I mean, I've been on the other side. I'd seen the bad. And so I knew how to deal with them. I mean, I knew the mindset. Um, then we get Christmas break. We get a week off, 2 weeks off for Christmas. So I drive home and I get a call from my chief, and he calls me into the office, and he tells me, he's like, "Hey, close the door." I'm like, all right. And I always, even today, I get nervous when somebody calls me, a boss person calls me into their office or says they need to talk to me. Um, but he said, I've already talked to my attorneys because we were a member of FOP, Fraternal Order of Police. So I was a union. He said, I don't need to give you a reason, but I'm giving you the option to quit. It came out of nowhere. Let me back up. Right before I started the academy, because I forgot this story. Again, I'm good at this, good at not telling stories in chronological order. A few weeks before this, I my wife, who is 14 weeks pregnant, I think about 14 weeks pregnant, is having bleeding issues. And I'm on duty. I'm already in uniform and stuff. I take her to the emergency room in uh, in Wagner, and she won't stop bleeding. And when we had the doctors looking at her, I said, I said, we've got to. He said, well, there's nothing we can do. I said, we've got to do something. And he said, what do you want me to do? Put a cork in her? At that time, I was a rookie cop and I was in uniform. Now, I probably would have done something. It bothered me a lot. Um, but the next day or sometime soon, everything runs into each other. She starts doing it again, but worse. And I take her to the hospital. I took her to St. Francis. Um, and she ends up having a miscarriage at 14 weeks, and she actually pushed out the baby. And she was so upset and everything. I cleaned up the floor and everything before anybody came in. But it hit pretty hard. It hit her hard, you know. And we were already not a very strong couple, you know. Like I said, we were great friends before we got married, before we got into a relationship. We were better at that. Um, but after that, you know, um, she things just weren't ever the same. Um, uh, you know, I'd always wanted to be a parent. She wanted to be a parent. We were excited about being parents. Um, but one day, it was Thanksgiving Day, and we're down at her mom's house, and she wanted to. They were going to go on the lake, and I didn't want to go on the lake, and I can't remember why. I have no idea why. I mean, it doesn't even make sense now. But I didn't want to, and we got into a fight with that. Well, uh, that night, Thanksgiving night, she leaves me, and so when I started the academy, I was actually just got through um, my baby dying, um, and then my wife left me, and here I'm going through that, and it's Christmas weekend now, and I don't have family to go to really. Um, I talked to my aunt and uncle every once in a while, but we still weren't close. It was always hit and miss. Um, and now my chief tells me that he doesn't need to give me a reason. And so I end up losing my job. Uh, and so my wife at the time ends up moving back in with her mother. And of course, I can't afford the place or anything. And luckily, one of the officers got me a Christmas job. And he said, "Don't tell them that you're no longer a police officer." But so I did security for a couple of days for like $20 an hour or something like that, which was a lot back then. Um, for a second job for an officer, now they get paid over twice that much. To exact 2.5 times that much. But so I not knowing what to do, I end up moving into my. At the time, we'd bought a Chevy pickup truck that I had, a white Chevy pickup truck. So I was living out of that. I didn't know what to do, so I actually ended up um, driving all the way to North Carolina to a buddy of mine's. I decided I might move there, might go back to college, try to get on law enforcement down up there. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was up there for about 2 or 3 weeks. It was nice. It was real pretty. I didn't feel like home though. But she called and she said that, well, let me back up. When I tried to get they filed divorce in her mama's county. I went, before I moved to North Carolina. I was living out of the truck. Um, I show up for court, and they said, "Well, um, uh, court is the judge is sick." And I said, "Well, yeah, but when's court?" He said, "Well," she said, "Well," the court clerk said, "Well, we'll call you whenever we reschedule." I was like, "Yeah, but I mean, I need to know because I know how this works. If I miss that, it'll go default and she gets everything." She said, "No, we'll call you. We'll wait until Friday. If you haven't heard from us Friday, call and we'll see if we can find out." And I said, "Okay." So I called back Friday. They still didn't know. Well, Monday comes over, and I get served with papers that said that it was for judgment because apparently her attorney faxed over the request to the judge, and he just signed off on it as if I never went to court. And so I lost everything, including I had to pay. I was supposed to pay for a gun that I'd already bought. We didn't owe on, but I had to pay her for it. She got to keep it, and I had to pay for it. Yeah, it didn't make sense. She got all three vehicles too. So I find this out, uh, and I go to North Carolina. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And they call me and tell me that they're gonna uh, send a repo guy to come get the truck. Which I talked to people. I knew repo people, and they said there's no way in hell, nothing's gonna happen. But being the man I am, I decided to drive all the way back, and I gave her the truck, and I had nowhere to live then. I didn't, I was completely homeless, so I moved back in with Donna again. And I tried working odd end jobs, and just I miss law enforcement. Is just what I wanted to do. And so I applied at my hometown because I was back in Coweta, and they gave me a job as a dispatcher. Um, and we also take care of the jail because it's just a 3-cell jail that's hooked onto the dispatch. And I did that for a short while. But I think that's pretty deep for right now. Anyway, I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you know what to do. Just let me know and I'll take care of it. Thank you.